Today I'm going to tell you the story of Jake, a rancher who found an Apache girl abandoned in the desert. A lonely man discovered a child with a sign saying no one wanted her, but the outcome surpassed all expectations. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from. A sign in the desert. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth as Jake Morrison guided his weathered pickup truck along the dusty ranch road. It was mid-July 1987, and the temperature gauge on his dashboard read 112 degrees. The drought had been going on for 3 months now, the worst he'd seen in his 42 years of life, and his cattle were starting to show the strain. Jake had inherited the Double M Ranch from his father 10 years ago, along with 1,500 acres of what used to be prime grazing land. Now it looked more like the surface of Mars, red dirt, scattered rocks, and the occasional stubborn mesquite tree that refused to give up the fight against nature's cruelty. He pulled up to the stock tank near the southern border of his property, where a solar-powered pump struggled to draw water from a well that was getting deeper every week. As he climbed out of the truck, his boots crunched on the sun-baked ground, and he could hear the distant lowing of cattle gathered around what remained of the watering hole. That's when he saw her. At first, Jake thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The heat could do that to a man, create mirages, make you see things that weren't there. But as he walked closer to the fence line, shading his eyes with his calloused hand, he realized what he was seeing was real. A small figure sat motionless against a fence post about 50 yards away, on the other side of his property line. The figure was so still that for a heart-stopping moment, Jake feared the worst. But then he saw her chest rise and fall with labored breathing. It was a child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. Her long black hair hung in tangled strands around her face, and her clothes were torn and dusty. She sat with her knees drawn up to her chest, her dark eyes staring straight ahead with an expression that Jake had only seen on the faces of soldiers returning from war. But what made Jake's blood run cold was the piece of cardboard hanging around her neck on a length of frayed rope. Even from this distance, he could make out the crude handwriting scrawled across it in black marker. Jake vaulted over the fence with surprising agility for a man his size. He'd played football in high school 25 years ago, and his 6'2" frame still carried the muscle memory of those days, even if his joints protested more than they used to. As he approached the girl, she didn't move or acknowledge his presence. Her breathing was shallow, and Jake could see that her lips were cracked from dehydration. He knelt down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten her. The sign around her neck was written in block letters that seemed to have been made by someone in a hurry. No one wanted her. Jake felt a surge of anger so intense it nearly knocked him backward. What kind of monster would do this to a child? Who would abandon a little girl in the middle of the desert with a message like that? "Hey there, sweetheart," Jake said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name's Jake. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl's eyes moved slightly, focusing on his face for the first time. They were the darkest brown he'd ever seen, almost black, and they held a depth of pain that no child should ever have to carry. "Are you hurt?" Jake asked, scanning her visible skin for injuries. He could see scrapes on her arms and legs, probably from walking through the desert brush, but nothing that looked life-threatening. The girl didn't respond, but Jake noticed her hands trembling slightly. Whether from fear, exhaustion, or the early stages of heat stroke, he couldn't tell. "I'm going to help you, okay?" Jake said, slowly reaching for his water bottle. "You must be thirsty." He unscrewed the cap and held it out to her. For a moment, she just stared at it. Then, moving like someone much older than her years, she took the bottle with both hands and drank deeply. "What's your name, honey?" he asked when she finished drinking. The girl looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could trust him with something as precious as her name. "Aiyana," she said finally, her voice hoarse from the dry heat. "Aiyana," Jake repeated, trying to get the pronunciation right. "That's a beautiful name." A tiny spark of something, maybe surprise, maybe hope, flickered in her eyes. "Eternal blossom," she whispered. Jake smiled. "Well, Aiyana, how about we get you out of this heat? I've got cold water back at the house, and maybe we can find you something to eat." He stood up slowly and held out his hand. Aiyana stared at it for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she reached out and placed her small hand in his. "My truck's just over there," Jake said, pointing toward the fence. "Think you can make it that far?" Aiyana nodded, but Jake could see her legs were unsteady. Without thinking, he scooped her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and the realization of how thin she was sent another wave of anger through him. As he carried her toward his truck, Jake caught sight of the sign still hanging around her neck. "No one wanted her." The words seemed to burn themselves into his brain. He stopped walking and looked down at Aiyana. "Hey, sweetheart, can I take this off you?" She nodded, and Jake carefully lifted the rope over her head. He held the piece of cardboard for a moment, then crumpled it up and shoved it deep into his pocket. "There," Jake said. "That's better." As he settled Aiyana into the passenger seat of his truck and cranked up the air conditioning, Jake realized his life had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and red. Questions without answers. The Double M Ranch house sat like a weathered sentinel against the desert landscape, its adobe walls and red tile roof a testament to southwestern endurance. As he pulled into the circular driveway, Jake glanced over at Aiyana. The girl sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, her dark eyes taking in everything but revealing nothing. "This is home," Jake said softly as he turned off the engine. "It's not much, but it's got cold water and food." The front door opened before they reached it, and Jake's housekeeper, Maria Gonzalez, appeared in the doorway. Maria had worked for the Morrison family for 30 years, a round woman in her 60s with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Dios mío," Maria breathed when she saw Aiyana. "Jake, what?" "I found her out by the south fence line," Jake said quietly. "She's dehydrated and hungry." Maria's expression immediately shifted into protective mode. "Come, mija," she said, switching to the gentle tone she reserved for frightened children. "Let's get you inside." The interior was cool and dim, a welcome relief from the brutal afternoon heat. Jake watched as Aiyana's eyes swept the living room, taking in the comfortable leather furniture and family photos. "Sit here, sweetheart," Maria said, patting the cushion of Jake's favorite recliner. As Maria bustled off toward the kitchen, Jake knelt down in front of the chair, where Aiyana sat perched on the edge, ready to run if necessary. "Aiyana," he said gently, "I need to ask you some questions. Is that okay?" She nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Do you remember how you got to where I found you? Did someone drive you there?" For a long moment, Aiyana just stared at him. Then she nodded. "Can you tell me who it was?" This time she shook her head, but Jake could see something in her eyes, fear maybe, or shame. Maria returned with a tall glass of ice water and a plate containing a sandwich, apple slices and cookies. Aiyana's eyes fixed on the food with an intensity that made Jake's chest tighten. "Go ahead, Misha," Maria encouraged. Aiyana picked up the sandwich with both hands and took a careful bite, as if she wasn't sure it was really meant for her. Then hunger took over, and she ate with focused determination. Jake and Maria exchanged glances over her head. Maria's expression was a mix of heartbreak and fury that mirrored Jake's own feelings. "I should call Sheriff Martinez," Jake said quietly. Maria nodded. "This child has been through something terrible. Look at her, she's scared of her own shadow." Jake had noticed the same thing. Every sudden sound made Aiyana flinch slightly. Whatever had happened to her before she ended up in the desert, it hadn't been good. He walked to the kitchen and picked up the phone, dialing the sheriff's department. "Sheriff's department," came a familiar voice. "Deputy Williams, this is Jake Morrison. I need to speak with Sheriff Martinez." "He's in a meeting, Jake. Can I help you?" Jake hesitated. "I found a child, a little girl, abandoned out in the desert." There was a pause. "Found a child? Jake, are you sure? It's been over 100 degrees out there." I'm sure, Tommy. She was sitting by my south fence line with a sign around her neck. Someone dumped her there. Jesus, Tommy breathed. Okay, I'll get the sheriff right away. Stay put. We'll be there in 30 minutes. Jake hung up and returned to the living room. Aiyana had finished eating and was now sitting back in the chair, looking slightly more relaxed, but still alert. Aiyana, Jake said, sitting on the coffee table across from her. Some people are going to come here soon. Police officers. They're going to want to ask you questions. Fear flashed across her face so quickly, Jake almost missed it. Hey, he said softly, they're the good guys, okay? They want to help you. But if you get scared, you can tell me, and I'll make sure they stop. Aiyana looked at him for a long moment, as if assessing whether he meant what he said. Will you stay? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. If you want me to, yes, I'll stay right here. For the first time since he'd found her, Aiyana's expression softened slightly. Okay, she said. Jake felt something shift in his chest. A protective instinct he'd never experienced before. This little girl had been thrown away like garbage, left to die in the desert with a sign that said no one wanted her. Aiyana, he said carefully, while we're waiting, is there anything else you want to tell me? Anything that might help us figure out where you came from? She was quiet for so long, Jake thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, in a voice so soft he had to lean forward to hear her, she said, My grandmother said I was cursed. That's why no one wanted me. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He looked into this beautiful child's face and saw not a curse, but a miracle. A little girl who'd survived something unthinkable. Your grandmother was wrong, Jake said firmly. There's nothing cursed about you, Aiyana. Nothing at all. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles broke the desert silence. The sheriff had arrived, and with him would come questions, paperwork, and decisions about Aiyana's future. But in that moment, looking at the little girl who'd been abandoned with a sign around her neck, Jake made a decision of his own. Whatever happened next, he wasn't going to let anyone make her feel unwanted ever again. The truth emerges. Sheriff Roberto Martinez sat across from Aiyana in Jake's living room, his weathered face showing a mixture of professional concern and personal anger. His voice carried the slight accent of someone who'd grown up speaking both English and Spanish. Take your time, sweetheart, Sheriff Martinez said gently. Can you tell me your full name? Aiyana sat curled in the corner of Jake's recliner, looking impossibly small. Aiyana Crow Feather, she whispered. That's a beautiful name. How old are you, Aiyana? 8, she replied, then hesitated. I think. My grandmother wasn't sure exactly when I was born. Jake felt his jaw tighten. What kind of family didn't know a child's exact birthday? Can you tell me about your grandmother? Aiyana's dark eyes grew distant. Rose Crow Feather. She lived on the reservation, but she didn't like it there. She said the spirits were angry with our family. Sheriff Martinez exchanged a meaningful glance with Jake. Did you live with your grandmother? Sometimes. Sometimes with other people. Grandmother said I brought bad luck wherever I went. The matter-of-fact way she said it broke Jake's heart. What about your parents? Aiyana shrugged. My mama died when I was little. Grandmother said she got sick because of me. And your father? Never met him. Grandmother said he was a white man who didn't want us. Aiyana, Sheriff Martinez continued, can you tell me what happened yesterday? For the first time, real fear flickered across Aiyana's face. She looked at Jake, seeking reassurance. It's okay, Jake said softly. You can tell us. Grandmother was very sick. She was coughing up blood. She told me to go to her friend, Mrs. Yazzie, and ask for help. And did you go to Mrs. Yazzie? Yes. But she wasn't home. When I came back, Grandmother she was dead. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. What did you do then? I didn't know what to do. I sat with her for a while. Then her nephew Jimmy came by. He said he was supposed to check on her. Jimmy? Do you know his last name? Jimmy Crow Feather. He has a truck. What happened when Jimmy arrived? Aiyana's voice grew even quieter. He was angry. He said he didn't have money for a funeral, and he didn't know what to do with me. He said I was nothing but trouble. Jake's hands clenched into fists. He made phone calls. I heard him asking if anyone would take me, But everyone said no. They all said I was cursed. Then what happened? Jimmy got really mad. He said nobody wanted me anyway. He wrote that sign and tied it around my neck. Then he drove me out to the desert and left me there. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake could hear Maria crying softly in the kitchen. Did Jimmy say anything else when he left you there? He said maybe someone would find me, or maybe I'd just disappear like I was supposed to. He said it wasn't his problem anymore. Jake stood up abruptly, walking to the window to hide his fury. Aiyana, Sheriff Martinez said, you've been very brave. Is there anything else you think we should know? She was quiet, then looked directly at Jake. Mr. Morrison, are you going to leave me somewhere too? The question hit Jake like a physical blow. He knelt down beside her chair, looking directly into her dark eyes. No, he said firmly. I'm not going to leave you anywhere you don't want to be. But you don't even know me. What if the bad luck comes to you too? Jake took her small hand in his. Aiyana, there is no bad luck. There's no curse. You're a little girl who's had some very bad things happen to her, but none of that was your fault. But grandmother said, your grandmother was wrong, Jake interrupted gently but firmly. Sheriff Martinez cleared his throat. Jake, we need to discuss what happens next. Legally, Aiyana will need to be placed in protective custody. Jake felt Aiyana's hand tighten in his. Oh, what does that mean? She asked. It means you'll stay with the foster family for a while, Sheriff Martinez explained. More strangers, Aiyana said quietly. More people who might not want me. Jake made a decision that surprised even him. What if she stayed here? Both Sheriff Martinez and Aiyana looked at him in shock. Jake, the sheriff said carefully, you're not a licensed foster parent. You'd need background checks, home studies. Then let's start the process, Jake said. Could she stay here temporarily, just until you find other family? Sheriff Martinez rubbed his jaw. It's highly irregular, but given the circumstances, he studied Jake's face. You understand this is a huge responsibility. I understand, Jake said. Would you want to stay here, Aiyana? Sheriff Martinez asked. Aiyana looked around the room, at Maria watching from the doorway, at the comfortable furniture, at Jake, who was still holding her hand and looking at her like she mattered. Yes, she whispered, if it's okay, if I won't bring bad luck. You won't, Jake said firmly. And Aiyana, you can call me Jake. For the first time since he'd found her, Aiyana almost smiled. Sheriff Martinez sighed and closed his notebook. All right, I'll file the paperwork for temporary emergency placement, but this is just the beginning. As he looked at Aiyana, Jake saw not a burden or a curse, but a brave little girl who deserved to know she was wanted. And for the first time in years, Jake Morrison felt like he had a real purpose, a new beginning. 3 months had passed since Jake found Aiyana in the desert, and the Double M Ranch had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The sound of a child's laughter now echoed through the house, mixing with the familiar sounds of cattle and wind. Aiyana sat at the kitchen table, carefully working on her homework under Maria's watchful eye. The local school had been understanding about her situation, and with tutoring, she was catching up quickly. Her hair was now clean and shining, pulled back in neat braids. "Jake!" Aiyana called out, as she heard his boots on the front porch. "Come see what I did in art class." Jake smiled as he walked through the door. She held up a drawing of the ranch house, complete with stick figures labeled Jake, Maria, and Aiyana standing in front. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Jake said, ruffling her hair gently. "We should frame it." "Really?" Her dark eyes lit up with genuine joy. The past 3 months hadn't been without challenges. There had been nightmares, moments of fear when she thought Jake might send her away, and the constant stream of social workers and home visits that came with the adoption process Jake had initiated. Sheriff Martinez appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands. His visits had become routine, but today something in his expression was different. "Afternoon, Jake. Aiyana, mind if we talk for a minute?" Jake felt familiar anxiety. Despite all their progress, he still worried that someone would decide he wasn't suitable to care for Aiyana. They stepped out onto the front porch, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert. "We found Jimmy Crow Feather," Sheriff Martinez said finally. "He's been arrested for child abandonment. But there's more. We've been investigating Aiyana's family situation." "Did you find someone?" Jake asked, though the thought of losing Aiyana made his chest ache. "We found her father." The words hit Jake like a punch. He'd known this was possible, but over 3 months he'd allowed himself to hope. What does he want? That's the thing. He doesn't want anything. When we contacted him, he said he'd never known Aiyana existed. He's waiving all parental rights. Says she's better off where she is. Jake felt intense relief. Really? Really? The adoption paperwork is moving faster than expected. Your background checks came back clean. Home studies have been positive, and Aiyana's been clear about wanting to stay. The adoption could be finalized within the month. Jake leaned against the porch railing, trying to process what he was hearing. "There's one more thing. We found out why Aiyana's grandmother believed she was cursed." "What do you mean?" Rose Crow Feather had serious mental health issues, possibly schizophrenia, though never formally diagnosed. She'd convinced herself that Aiyana was responsible for every bad thing that happened: her daughter's death, her own illness, even minor troubles. Jake felt anger toward a dead woman. The point is, none of it was real. There was no curse, no bad luck, just a sick woman who needed help she never got. They heard the screen door open, and Aiyana stepped onto the porch. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of old wariness. Jake knelt down and took her hands. "Everything's perfect, sweetheart. Sheriff Martinez came to tell us that the adoption papers are almost ready." "What does that mean?" "It means," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion, "that pretty soon you'll officially be my daughter, if that's what you want." Aiyana was quiet for a long moment. "Will I still be Aiyana Crow Feather?" "You can be whatever you want. Aiyana Crow Feather Morrison, if you like. It's your choice." She considered this seriously. "I think I'd like to be Aiyana Morrison, but I want to remember where I came from too." "We'll never forget where you came from," Jake promised. "Your Apache heritage is part of who you are, but your future, that's ours to write together." Aiyana threw her arms around Jake's neck. "I love you, Jake," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart," he whispered back. Sheriff Martinez quietly excused himself, leaving father and daughter alone as the desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors. As they sat together on the porch swing, Aiyana curled up against his side. "Jake," she said quietly, "yeah? Do you really think there was never any curse? That the bad things weren't my fault?" Jake looked down at this brave, beautiful child. "Aiyana, the only magic I believe in is the kind that brought you to me. Everything else is just life, some good, some bad, but never anyone's fault for just existing." She was quiet, then looked up at him. "I'm glad you found me." Jake kissed the top of her head. "I'm glad I found you too, sweetheart. Best thing that ever happened to me." As the stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, Jake realized his life had finally become what it was supposed to be. The sign that had once hung around Aiyana's neck, "No one wanted her," had been replaced by the most powerful truth he'd ever known. She was wanted here, in this house, in this family they'd built together from love and second chances. The girl who had been abandoned in the desert had found her way home.